Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. If you live in the UK, you might have seen reports recently that the UK government has declared data centres as part of the critical national infrastructure. The UK is, of course, not alone in this. Data and supercomputing centres across the globe are on the rise after all, as is the use of computing in research. Alas, the rise in computing comes at a cost, whether it's the production of hardware devices, whether it's the environmental impact they have when they're running, or whether it's managing the waste once they reach the end of their lives. In a report published in September 2021 called The Real Climate and Transformative Impact of ICT, the link for which you can find in the episode notes, the authors state that the share of greenhouse gas emissions coming from the IT sector is estimated to be between 1.8 and 2.8%. To put this into context, there is a EU report on transport from 2022 which puts the contributing factor of emissions for the aviation industry at 2%, which is to say that the contributions from information and computing technologies are not insignificant. And this is something that concerns an increasing number of researchers and research software engineers, some of whom I already interviewed for this podcast. That the interest in this subject has picked up could also be seen at the annual conference of the UK Society of Research Software Engineering this year, 2024. The conference took place in the lovely city of Newcastle again, as it did in 2022, and there were a number of sessions and posters on climate and greener computing, on top of which Kirsty Pringle and Loic Lanelong launched a special interest group around greener computing. It's not the first conference where the environmental impact of computing was discussed, of course, but I think this conference certainly put the subject into a much more prominent position. And there's certainly been quite a build-up to this over the past 12 months. Partially, I guess, because of reporting in the general press, but also because a number of researchers and research software engineers started to take action and look into what can be done to make computing environmentally more sustainable in future. A lot of this effort has gone into getting a grip on concrete data of energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, as we will hear during this episode. What actually are the current data, and how do we get them? How does energy consumption relate to the emission of greenhouse gases? And there's a good reason why it takes some effort to get reliable estimates, because as it turns out, getting a baseline is more difficult than we may think. A couple of months before the conference, I had a conversation with Charlotte Pascoe and Poppy Townsend from the Centre of Environmental Data Analysis. Charlotte and Poppy are members of a team at UKRI, the UK Research and Innovation Organisation, working on a scoping project how the digital research infrastructure in the UK can get to net zero. And here they talk about what their experiences were in getting baseline data. So let's hand over to Poppy and Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Pascoe, and I've been working on the UKRI project for getting our digital research infrastructure to net zero. And I'm based at the Centre for Environmental Data Analysis.
Poppy.
Hi, so I'm Poppy Townsend and I work with Charlotte on that really big project funded by UKRI, and I also work at the Centre for Environmental Data Analysis.
And we're going right into the subject now, because you need to explain to us what this project is and what you're trying to accomplish with that.
The project was just under 2 years, so about a year and a half, and we finished it last summer. And we basically had to look at all of the digital research infrastructure funded or majority funded by UKRI. So that ranged from anything from supercomputers to laptops to data centers to the software and the code and the people doing all of that infrastructure as well.
That must have been quite a task to get an overview of all the infrastructure. I mean, are you feeling confident that they actually covered all of the infrastructure? Yeah.
No, I don't think it was possible that we could cover everything. I think Charlotte will agree that the scope of it was huge. And as we did more digging, we unearthed more things. So I think we collaborated with about 40 individual project partners from about 20 different institutes. So it was definitely not a single
Mm.
project thing it was led by us, but we couldn't have done it without all of our amazing project partners and all of the research community who contributed, even if they weren't a named project partner.
We didn't get an overview of entirely all the infrastructure, this is true,
Mm.
but we did learn enough about different aspects of that infrastructure to help us with understanding what the challenges are in getting baseline information about what is the current state of emissions related to those infrastructures and how to address the challenge of reaching net zero with incomplete baseline information.
What were the lessons then that you learned?
I think the main thing that we learned throughout the project was that if we're not going to fix it with just technical solutions, it has to be the people and processes that
Mm.
manage and use and deliver these different types of infrastructure that are going to be the main changes that we need to make. And I think at the beginning of the project, we thought it would be technical solutions that would be the ones that we needed to focus on, but actually it was much more about the people and the processes behind running the supercomputer that is a key area that needs to be focused on.
Right, because that's the question that I actually had. Which are the main contributors to emissions?
One of our project partners, forgive me because I may pronounce his name wrong, but Wim van der.
From Glasgow, was it?
That's the
Yeah,
one.
yeah, okay, yeah.
So Vim's team looked into this and they did an estimate of how many emissions per year for digital research infrastructure. And for large
Mm.
scale computing facilities, they estimated that it would be about 40 kilotons of CO2 per year. And for server rooms and laptops, it was a little bit less. It was 36 kilotons per year. And that was split between almost half and half, not quite, between UKRI funded equipment, so laptops for UKRI staff, for example,
Yeah.
and non UKRI funded equipment. So maybe you work in a university and the university has paid for your equipment rather than it
Mhm.
being paid for through a UKRI grant. So it was very, very similar numbers between those. So I think one of the key things that showed was that both are equally important contributors to the emissions of UKRI funded research. So you can't say that large scale computing facilities is more impactful than the laptops and server rooms.
There's a survey that we ran as part of our project and then a follow-up survey by a company called 3Adapt, because what we found with our original survey is some of our data was incomplete. And the follow-up survey discovered the same kind of thing, that there are challenges around the granularity of data that we can get from facilities,
Right.
that sometimes the information that we have about the person who's responsible for the facility is not necessarily the person who is in charge of the estates aspect. And maybe we don't have information about the electricity consumption of rooms, but rather of whole buildings. So there's a real need for a kind of long-term, perhaps longitudinal approach to capturing this information from facilities, because right now it's very challenging across the board to get this information. As part of our
Mm.
project, we commissioned some smaller groups to look at specific facilities and really dig down into, say, what is the energy consumption for 5 facilities over a 24-hour period, and really looking at those resources. But collecting that information across the board turns out to be a really quite challenging, difficult thing to do.
And we're going to hear from Charlotte and Poppy again a bit later when we talk about what the next steps are and how we can make our computing efforts more environmentally sustainable. But for now, let's stay with the theme of getting data about energy consumption for a bit and return to the conference. Jessie Huntley from the Science and Technology Facilities Council, or the STFC, which is part of UKRI, gave a presentation at the conference on tracking carbon costs of optimization algorithms, a project for which she used a Python library called Code Carbon. I met up with Jess after her talk to let her explain her work in a bit more detail. So here's Jess.
My name's Jess Huntley. I'm a mathematical research software engineer and I work in the computational maths group at STFC, which stands for the Science and Technology Facilities Council. And yeah, in addition to my kind of day job as a research software engineer, I also lead a working group in my department that focuses on green computing and trying to reduce the carbon footprint of the work that we do.
Exactly, and you had a very interesting presentation today where you integrated Code Carbon, I think, which is a Python package. But perhaps you can talk a little bit about the work.
Yeah, of course. So within the computational maths group, we develop and maintain a software package called Fit Benchmarking, which compares the performance of various optimization algorithms on different fitting packages. And up until recently, we'd kind of benchmarked them on and kind of produced metrics for runtime and accuracy as a comparison. But I wanted to add in an emissions table to that as well, so that users can then take into account carbon efficiency when choosing which algorithms they want to use when fitting problems for their data. Yeah, so Code Carbon is a Python package which is really easy to use and can be added to any kind of piece of code regardless of application, and it measures the hardware electricity usage whilst the code's running to then produce an estimate of the carbon footprint.
How did you get to this idea?
So I've always been interested in sustainability and a couple of years ago set up a kind of green computing working group within the department, and we've always been on the lookout for kind of different tools and resources that are available for working in a more carbon efficient manner. So I've kind of created a bank of resources I've shared across the department, and I hope to share more widely than just within STFC in the future as well. So yeah, it kind of made sense to actually be using these tools myself in the work that I do, and Fit Benchmarking seemed a good place to start with that. And so one of my colleagues presented a talk on Fit Benchmarking at a workshop a couple of years ago, and one of the questions there kind of asked, well, why aren't you looking at carbon emissions as well as runtime and accuracy? So yeah, it seemed a good piece of work for me to pick up, considering it's something that I'm interested in, and hopefully there's interest from the users as well.
What did you find out, actually, by running these, creating these emission tables?
Yeah, so I guess firstly, I noticed that with Code Carbon, you're not always getting an accurate measurement of the power consumption and therefore kind of an accurate estimate of carbon emissions, because it relies on a couple of tools. So if you're running on Windows, you need to have the Intel Power Gadget installed, and that's now deprecated, so it's not available for people who are kind of new to using Code Carbon. And equally on Linux, you need to have root access to change the permissions so that Code Carbon can actually access the power consumption data that it needs. So I found quite quickly that if you don't have access to the accurate measurements, then you're just getting an emissions estimate based off of the runtime, and it just multiplies it by some kind of predetermined factors. It doesn't offer much insight unless you actually have these kind of access to the more accurate data. Once I kind of got myself set up on a machine where I could get good estimates of the carbon emissions, I found that, well, what I want to kind of look into, I'm still in the quite early stages at the moment of this piece of work. So I've kind of done the implementation and some initial sort of investigatory experiments. But yeah, I'm interested in looking at how emissions changes with like number of cores that you're running a problem on, and so I'm looking at kind of parallelizing some of the minimizers and different optimization algorithms that we have in Fit Benchmarking to see how emissions changes with what you'd hope would be increased performance in terms of runtime.
As Jess mentioned, Code Carbon is relatively straightforward to use, but you need to look out for the gotchas in order to get meaningful results. But there are, of course, other tools as well. Some of you may remember my conversation with Loic Lanelong from early 2024, where he explained the greener algorithms toolset that he and others developed and made available. Measuring the energy consumption of computing, whether it's your laptop or an application that you run on a supercomputer, is one thing. But how does it relate to the emission of greenhouse gases? Intuitively, we may think that the more energy we use, the higher the amount of CO2 or other gases we push out. But this relationship may not be quite so straightforward. For one, when we talk about computing or using electronic devices in general, we need to consider what it takes to produce these devices and not just the amount of emissions they produce when they're running. Take your mobile phone, for instance. Reports on how much CO2 gets emitted by using them varies, but what they all agree on is that the cost of producing them is considerable. And major savings in terms of reducing emissions can be achieved by using your phones for longer rather than buying a new gadget every year or two. In fact, there is a so-called greenhouse gas protocol which separates different scopes of contributing gashouse emissions. Broadly speaking, Scope 2 are those when we power up devices. That is, when we use the energy provided by, for instance, the national grid. Whereas Scope 3, sometimes called embedded emissions, are when we consider the emissions from the production and distribution of the devices and services we buy. And this brings me back to what I said a few moments ago about the relationship between energy consumption and the emission of greenhouse gases being not always aligned. In fact, this has been the theme of Andy Turner's talk at the RSE conference called Environmental Impact and Social Responsibility in Large-Scale HPC Services, an Archer 2 case study. And here's Andy.
My name's Andy Turner. I work at EPCC at the University of Edinburgh. My main focus is around helping people use our national HPC facilities, and I provide some sort of technical leadership, particularly for the Archer 2 UK National Supercomputing Service.
Which is actually the subject of the talk you gave yesterday, and about energy and emissions efficiency.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of work over the past probably 24 months now, trying to understand a bit more about the energy usage of the service, and how that could potentially translate into emissions and what that implications are for net zero and for improving the environmental impact of the service.
And what were the conclusions? I mean, if you could repeat that here sort of in a nutshell, basically.
I think one of the most interesting things that came out of it that I hadn't realised when I started was that it's often assumed that energy efficiency and emissions efficiency are exactly aligned, right? So if you reduce your energy usage for a particular calculation or something like that, then you reduce the emissions overall for it. But actually, because the emissions are not just made up of the energy use, so there's this terminology around emission scopes. So there's emissions from the energy are sometimes called Scope 2 emissions, but there's also the emissions associated with manufacturing the equipment, often called embodied emissions. And actually, for a large HPC service like Archer 2, located in a location that has low carbon energy, like South Scotland, then actually the embodied emissions end up dominating.
Is that what Scope 2 and 3 is?
So
the difference
Scope
between
2 is like the emissions from essentially the energy used, the electricity used from the national grid or something like that in the UK. And Scope 3 are the embodied emissions, which are the emissions associated with manufacturing, transporting, and decommissioning, and getting rid of the hardware itself.
Oh, right. Okay. So when we look at the emissions rather than the energy consumption, so they're not aligned in that respect. Because,
so when your embodied emissions, the Scope 3 emissions, dominate, what you end up having to do to minimize or to maximize the emissions efficiency is run the system for as long as possible. And while you've got the system, make sure it's as loaded as possible and you get the most benefit from it. And that often means running things as fast as possible, which is the opposite of energy efficiency.
Right, exactly, because it uses a lot.
So what you end up with, the situation is that you want to maximize the emissions efficiency, but that means lowering energy efficiency because you're running hotter than you would like. And so you end up with this situation where energy efficiency is not the same as efficiency. In fact, they're pushing in opposite directions.
We talk about decarbonizing energy supply, and I think in the UK, or at least in Scotland, I think we're pretty much on the way. So as what I understood from yesterday.
I think one of the key points is it depends how carbon intense the grid is, what your Scope 2 emissions. And when the Scope 2 emissions are low, because you've got a very low carbon emission from the grid, which is the UK is actually, I mean, I think the whole of Europe's pretty similar, has been doing very well in moving quite quickly to low carbon energy generation. It helps when you're somewhere that's very windy, generally, or very sunny for solar panels and things like that. Or you're maybe in France where you have a lot of nuclear power, which has its own environmental impacts, which are not captured in emissions. Then the embodied emissions, the Scope 3 emissions dominate, and that leads to this thing where you want to run as fast as possible. And of course, that's great for emissions efficiency, but is not great often for funders of systems because it increases your electricity bill significantly.
Yes. Indeed. And embodied, I mean, give us a flavour of what kind of order of magnitude we're talking about in terms of...
So for Archer 2, in the scenario we were looking at, which was some rough estimates of the embodied emissions, I mean, one of the challenges here is that the data quality for embodied emissions is not great for computing hardware. So you're always a bit uncertain about what you're estimating. Say we assume that Archer 2 has a lifetime of 6 years, then it looks about 2/3 embodied emissions and 1/3 Scope 2 electricity emissions for the service. So the embodied Scope 3 emissions are probably about twice as large as the Scope 2 emissions.
And I think one of the slides I do remember, because it says something like about 13,000 steaks. Is that the
Yes, I think one of the interesting things we want to do as well is you can provide these numbers, but most people, I mean, even people who have looked into this don't have a good context for what they mean in terms of their day-to-day emissions. So what you want to provide people with when you give these numbers is some sort of context for how it fits with other things they might do in their life. And that sounds kind of funny, right? You can sort of say, oh, well, here's what it means for sort of meat-based, plant-based diets. Here what it means compared to the emissions from a household. Here's what it means compared to transatlantic flying. These are things that you have some control over. But it has a serious side, because without that context, individuals can't make decisions about their behaviour, because you don't know what the big influence is. You know, should I focus on, as an RSE, on reducing or improving the energy efficiency of my algorithm? And that might be right in some cases. You know, it depends on what hardware you're running on and what the system looks like. Or is it more impactful for me as an RSE to become vegan, for example? Right. Okay. You know, that might outweigh all the work I could ever do on software and things like that. So the numbers have to have that context, because these are personal decisions in the end that people are making.
How do you advise, or what do you tell people how they could use Archer 2, say, more effectively or more efficiently and more conscious of the environmental impact?
The fundamental point is that actually using your resources you're given on systems like Archer 2 efficiently is the key thing. So I don't have numbers to back this up, and it'd be an interesting study to do, but I suspect that a lot more time or emissions efficiency or energy efficiency or any sort of efficiency is lost because people make mistakes when running jobs and things like that. So they run for 12 hours and find actually the results are useless because they put the wrong parameter in an input file, or they made a mistake in the job submission file, or things like that. So I suspect those things probably have a bigger impact than sort of 10% changes in how you run things. But there is a different scale thing in terms of what we can do as a service as well. You know, we can look at what software is used on the system, and where you see a software that has a huge amount of use. So obviously a small change, a small improvement in the efficiency of the use of that software has a big impact. And that even applies for the Scope 3 emissions, because the more efficient you make the software, the more impact you get from the machine in its lifetime. And even if the Scope 3 emissions dominate, that's critical to getting good at emissions efficiency.
Because they last longer then.
Yeah, you can get more research impact for the emissions you've already taken by buying the machine and having it there.
Greener computing was also represented during the poster session. Enrico Olivier from the University of Exeter presented his ideas for creating greener software, and I had a chance to talk to him briefly after the poster session.
I'm Enrico Olivier. I'm a RSE in the Research and Software Analytics group at the University of Exeter.
And you're also the author of a poster called Green Computing, which is what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, that's correct. So the idea behind the poster was to kind of get the RSEs more aware about green computing, but in particular what they can do with regards to the software development process in producing more greener software. It's a topic that I got interested in about last year, after reading a paper on the energy efficiency of different programming languages.
What is it that you recommend in your poster then?
So one of the things I looked at in the poster, and it's fairly well known, as I said earlier, that different programming languages got different energy efficiencies. For instance, AI and machine language models nowadays is very commonplace, but it's well known that deep learning models, you need a lot of energy to generate a reasonably accurate model. And so the idea then is, what is a suitable accuracy here for any particular application? And that doesn't apply to AI models in general, but beyond that as well. So any application that you might develop as a software developer is you got to think about what accuracy and what precision do I really need in a particular context or use case. So I kind of set out three basic categories where a software developer should think about in terms of the development process about energy efficiency.
What are these categories?
The first one is monitoring. It's something that we do anyway during the development process. Kind of monitor, particularly if you're an HPC, how how fast your code runs. But now there's also tools that allow you to monitor the energy usage of your application. So you can't improve what you can't measure, so monitoring is important. And then the second bet is optimization. And it's not just making the code run faster, but as I said, also looking at your use cases. Can you cut down compute by reducing the accuracy or the resolution that you require in your application? And then obviously looking at programming language, and then also kind of looking at the hardware you're running on. I'm not saying that you should switch using Python or JavaScript. All I'm saying is during the development process, give it a consideration.
Okay, so far we've talked about data collection and what the relation is between energy use and gashouse emissions. But what are we going to do with all of that information? What is it that we need to do to get to net zero and to a more environmentally sustainable use of computing? No quick and magic fixes were offered at the conference, and I don't think there are any. But what we are seeing is the beginning of concrete actions being taken. Enrique already mentioned some of it in my conversation with him just now. Or think about running jobs on supercomputers. Are there particular times in the day when it's environmentally better to run a big job? And it turns out there is. And there's even a tool for that. It's called CATS, the Climate Aware Task Scheduler, which started its life during a hackathon event at the Collaborations Workshop in Manchester 2023, organised by the UK Software Sustainability Institute. Since then, CATS took off, and version 1 has recently been published. But I better let two of the developers who I met at the conference, Sadie Bartholomew and Colin Sosi, explain that in more detail.
I'm Colin Soze. I'm a senior research software engineer at the National Oceanography Centre.
Exactly, and we have Sadie.
Hi Peter, my name's Sadie Bartholomew. I'm a computational scientist for the National Centre for Atmospheric Science and the University of Reading.
Okay, well, it's all about climate and oceans and the planet and green computing as well. And I believe that you've done something called CATS. Is
Yes,
that right?
that's
So,
right.
so could you describe what it is and how it all came about?
So CATS started as a hack day project at the Software Sustainability Institute's collaborations workshop in 2023. And the idea is that you can time shift when compute jobs run to when the grid has less carbon-intensive electricity being used. So a user specifies where they're located, how long they think their job is going to take, and the CATS algorithm will try and schedule the job for the lowest carbon time in the power grid in the coming 48 hours.
Sadie, what was your contribution there?
So I was part of the original Hack Day team. I believe there were about 7 or 8 of us as part of the team, and we've kind of continued it forward. So I think the first thing that I did on the Hack Day was help towards the design of the original prototype, which is what we did on the Hack Day, and then going forward we've developed it further with further support from the SSI. So for example, our plans are to allow it to interface with the Slurm scheduler as a big aim. We also plan to put forward a paper into the Journal of Open Source
JOS.
Software, JOS, yes. So these plans are underway. I believe we're quite far ahead in terms of we're quite far towards the end of our schedule, so we're wrapping up some loose ends now. But we have a version 1 out, and It's been a team effort, but I think we've all put in individual contributions along with our strengths and our backgrounds, including Colin has done plenty.
So CATS version 1, which we released recently, is targeted at the AT scheduler, which is kind of the most simple scheduler that's in pretty much every Unix system. And that was our original target from the Hack Day, but we've polished it off and made it a bit more user-friendly since then. And as Sadie said, we're now trying to target Slurm, which is used on many HPC systems, so we can actually scale it up to much bigger systems. But at the moment, our target is kind of small machines that maybe sat under someone's desk that don't get heavily utilized, so there's a good flexibility for changing when a job runs. If you're going to run this on a big HPC that's always 95% busy, then there's not much scope for actually when you can time shift work to. So our target is really those less busy machines, the way we could really make a difference in the carbon intensity of the power we're using.
How do people get hold of it, and how do they install it, and how do they run it? And who would that be? Is that the HPC administrator then, or can anybody do that?
So for CATS v1, it's a user installable package via pip, so they can get it from our GitHub page, which I think is github.com/greenscheduler/CATS. For the version 2, where we're working on a Slurm plugin, that is probably something that an administrator would have to look at. But we are also considering whether we can make a sort of version 1.5 that takes the approach we've done with AT and applies that to Slurm for an individual user who wants to do this on a cluster where they don't have admin access, but they want to shift things around themselves without the help of the admins.
So we're talking about moving forward. So what does moving forward look like? Are you going out to the centers individually, talking to them, trying to convince them, or how do you spread the word?
Once we have our prototype Slurm system up and running, which we're hoping to have in the next few weeks, we are going to be talking to some bigger HPC centres to do some test rollouts. So we've got quite a few who've volunteered to help us test it.
All right, okay.
And we'll see how that goes. And one thing is also not just the technical side, but how users treat it. So we're probably going to see these centres configure a green queue that people can submit their jobs to, where their jobs may take a bit longer to run, but they'll hopefully have a lower environmental impact from running them. And it'll be interesting to see how many users choose to use that green queue versus the, I want my research run now and run it in the main queue.
What's your gut feeling?
I think about 1/3 of people will opt for the green queue, given the completely free choice. Another third might opt for it if there's some incentive, like they get extra time or it doesn't cost them so much if they've got some kind of credit system. And the other third will want their research done immediately and don't care.
So how does it actually find the most effective time?
One of the core components is an API which we hook up to, which is for the UK only, which I guess is a limitation that we're looking into in terms of making it more generalised. But this is a API for the UK which will tell us, I believe it's the most carbon efficient point within the next 2 days. And obviously we have to account for the time the job will take. So we're effectively doing, is it almost an integration over that curve? And from that calculation, we can determine the best time to run it given a certain start time.
Yeah, so there's a website called carbonintensity.org.uk that has an API that gives the carbon intensity forecast for each of the UK power regions. I think there are 7 or 8 of those.
Yeah.
And that will give you a 48-hour forecast. And then we pick the time, as Sadie said, using a sort of integration algorithm that finds the lowest carbon across that time period. One thing we are hoping to find is some longer-term sources of data so we can cope with jobs that last for more than 2 days. And generally, the forecasts for that are available in some places, but they get less accurate as the time goes out because it's based on the wind and the sun forecasts, essentially.
I guess the crowning jewel of all things around environment and computing came on Thursday at the conference, with a Birds of the Feather session. Organised by Kirsty Pringle and Loic Lanelong, the focus of the workshop and talks was about what we can and should do. Amongst the presenters were representatives from the Wellcome Trust and UK Research and Innovation, 2 major UK funding bodies. And it's great to see them talk about it at the conference, which also shows that funders are taking the subject very seriously. Which takes me back to another part of my conversation with Charlotte and Poppy, from whom you've heard earlier, because in our conversation we touched on the recommendations that followed from their work. So here are Charlotte and Poppy again, talking about the strategies and key themes from their report.
The big stories coming out of all of this information was via a roadmap and a toolkit. So the roadmap is kind of milestones on the journey to net zero, and it was organised into 3 different delivery pathways. So on the roadmap, there was policy and governance, there was competitive funding, and there was delivery partnership. And then on the toolkit side, that was much more about summarising the strategic themes that were found in the project. And it was kind of a summary of all of the detailed technical recommendations and information from the scoping project, which can help us on the journey to net zero. So those 6 strategic themes were mission focus, action-based research, shared responsibility, working with peers and suppliers, green software engineering, and a knowledge hub.
I think the mission focus is kind of vital because that's about having a mindset to think about how does my work impact on the mission to get our economy to net zero. And it's something that sits in our minds. Like we consider health and safety in the work that we do, we should be thinking about net zero as well in all of the aspects of the work we do.
You also mentioned green software engineering. Could you explain what you mean by that term?
So traditionally, software engineering has focused on functionality and reliability and the extensibility of software products and how to maintain them. But the challenge of green software engineering is to include within that to limit carbon consumption at all stages. So that's about how your software runs, the choices of how you code the problems that you want to solve. But more broadly than that, it also involves the emissions that are embodied within the equipment in which you're running your code. As we green our electricity supply, as more of our electricity in the UK comes from renewable resources, part of the pathway to net zero also involves us reducing our consumption as well of electricity. And that's something that we can take on board as software engineers in terms of how we write our code so that it can run as efficiently as possible. More than that, though, green software engineering also includes the people running facilities as well. There was some really interesting work that happened as part of the Archer 2 case study, where they reduced the clock speed of their CPUs by about 5%. And by doing so, had a 20% decrease in energy consumption. So for a small decrease in the speed with which you get to your results, there was a very large payback in terms of the reduction in energy consumption. So there's a challenge there, I think, for us to think about how we value the different aspects of what good software engineering looks like. Is it about speed to the solution, or is it about getting to the solution, trying to minimize emissions? Those things are not necessarily incompatible.
Some of the measures that Charlotte and Poppy mentioned are already happening, and Charlotte's comment on thinking about if your program really needs to be as quick and extensive as you wish kind of echoes what Enrico told us earlier. And then, of course, we do have programs like CATS, Code Carbon, or greener algorithms that help us make more environmentally friendly decisions when it comes to deploying computing power. And there's more to come, as Kirsty and Loic told me when I met them after the Birds of the Feather session. So here are Kirsty and Loic.
Hi, my name is Kirsty Pringle. I'm Project Manager for the Software Sustainability Institute. I'm based in EPCC up in Edinburgh.
Hi, my name is Loic Lanong. I'm a researcher at the University of Cambridge and I lead the Green Algorithms project.
And I interviewed you both for, I think, exactly the subject we're going to talk about today, which is greener computing, because we're here at the RSE Con 24 in Newcastle. Were you surprised that there were so many people here for the Birds of the Feather session?
Yeah, for the Green RSE session. Yeah, I'm really pleased. It's obviously the last day of the conference. I think it's lovely, the idea to have a community day on the last day of the conference. I think it was a really great idea. And I'm really pleased to see so much interest in Green RSE. I don't think there's many people that I've spoken to that don't have some interest in it, so that's great. And I think there's really a feeling that it's a good time to do this. It's a good time to be working on this topic. So yeah, no, I'm really pleased that so many people came along.
What I'm really impressed by is the number of talks or posters which are actually dedicated to green software engineering. And that's one of the first conferences I've been to where the topic is not green computing, but that just happens to be a topic where people submit talks or submit posters. Normally there's like one invited talk and that's it. So it's really great to see actually the community and people who are not necessarily doing that all the time really picking it up as a topic.
And because you've been actually involved with it quite a while now, haven't you?
Yeah, and it's a bit of a lonely job. Normally like my talk is the only one on green computing in a conference which is about imaging or engineering or astrophysics, but they are aware it's important, so they invite someone to come and talk about it. And so that's why it's so interesting to have so many people just spontaneously submitting talks on that.
And in fact, there's a special interest group that's now going to launch. Kirsten, maybe you can say something about that and how people can join.
Yes, so we're just setting up a special interest group at the moment. So we have this Birds of the Feather session. We've had to think about some principles that we could apply to research software engineering, the kind of greener principles, so how we as research software engineers can change what we do and also change the RSE role to kind of try and ensure that environmental sustainability is embedded in the work that we do. And the special interest group should take that forward, really. We're trying to build a bit of a community about this. There's so much knowledge within the RSE community, and there's a lot of desire to achieve change and create change. And as we kind of touched on earlier in the community sessions, it really takes a community to make those changes. So what we're trying to do is to bring people together and kind of try and see how we as a community, how we as a group can address this environmental issue.
And how can they join?
So we have a mailing list. I'm not
Okay.
totally sure what the address is. Let me look it up. But basically, people can join through our mailing list or follow. We'll post it again on the UK RSE Slack channel. So that's the mailing list to sign up to get information about events and activities. We're also looking for people that would like to take a more active role and to be kind of part of the steering group of the SIG. So yeah, just let me know if you're interested in taking part.
One final question, because one of the ideas that came up was training. So how can we embed this in training, and where are we going from there?
Yeah, training is so important, and both to train RSEs in environment, to be more aware of environmental impact, and then RSEs can be like the best trainers possible because they already spend their time trying to educate researchers on doing less damage with their codes. So that's something that a bit weird, that there's very little training resources available for green computing. And so we're tackling that at the moment. We're hoping to release a free online on-demand training material in the coming months. I'd say I don't want to commit on the deadline, but we're hoping to release that as soon as possible. We're doing as fast as we can because it's just to have some material open access. And in the meantime, if people are interested, there is some material available on the Green Algorithms website, but it's mostly like recorded talk, so it's not quite as good. So we're hoping to make that proper course. The first version will be like a generic introduction course, which will apply to RSEs, but also to researchers and anyone who has an interest in this topic. And then something that came up from the Bird of the Feather session today actually is the importance of and the opportunity to have a green RSE specific training. And as we said, there's so much knowledge here and so much skill. So I think it will be really interesting to do a kind of level 2 training as well and make it available so that anyone can pick it up.
Okay. Is that something that the special interest group will be looking into? Or?
Yeah, we'll certainly try, and I think it's the special interest group's really well placed to identify what training already exists and then to identify what training needs there are. And then the second phase of that would be trying to bring people together to try and create training material. I mean, it's not, as Ken mentioned, it takes time to write new training material.
Indeed.
But we're, I think, really well placed to identify what needs to be covered in that kind of training material. I don't think that's even been particularly well defined yet.
And I think one thing we can embrace with this training is to not try to make it perfect on the first go and just build on community building and just say, okay, well, we'll do a first version and then people can contribute and improve it over time. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be there.
I thought it was quite an impressive lineup of talks on greener and environmentally sustainable computing at the RSE Conference 2024 in Newcastle. And I hope this episode gives you a good overview of what's happening, and I'm sorry if it's been a bit longer this time. If you're interested, there are a number of links in the episode notes for you to follow up on. And as Kirsty just said, feel free to join the special interest group. Just before I go, I'd like to say a few words about the conference itself. Green computing was, of course, not the only subject of the event, and once the presentations and YouTube recordings go live, you can catch up with the talks in case you missed them or you want to review them. This conference was indeed the biggest UK RSE conference yet, with well over 400 attendees who came to Newcastle and over 70 online participants. All of this was made possible through the keen and energetic volunteers of the Society for Research Software Engineering in the UK, but also thanks to the number of sponsors we had. In fact, the Society was able to team up with Cloud Cubed, who agreed to become a platinum sponsor for the conference, and I met up with Martin Sharkey, founder and CEO of Cloud Cubed, to talk about what led to this partnership.
I'm Martin Sharkey. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Cubed. We're a technology transformation consultancy organisation working largely in government and within education and dealing with specialities around trusted research computing and also looking at the sustainability aspect of how we can solve that problem by adopting things like cloud technologies to reduce the capital expenditure and the power draw that physical services typically bring with data centers.
It's your first time here at an RSE conference, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and we happen to be gifted with the duty of being the platinum sponsor as well.
Indeed.
It's a big old task, but yeah, we're really delighted to be here joining everyone at RSE.
So what brought this about? I mean, why join the RSE community and how did this happen?
Roughly about 2 years ago, we started on a journey of building trusted research environments, largely on Microsoft Azure. And since then, we've been working in conjunction with universities and also with private industry to look at how not only academia but industry could adopt trusted research environment to enable accelerated science, almost separating the job of having to engineer and build complex research environments while also being a researcher. So we wanted to help accelerate and separate those duties so that researchers can just get on with the job of doing research. They didn't have long lead times to deploy infrastructure inside physical research domains in colleges, and we could just enable that acceleration through the Azure Trusted Research Accelerator that we built for institutions.
So I think you worked with Imperial before, didn't you? Could you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Imperial are almost trailblazing in terms of their approach to research. Traditionally, these trusted research environments have grown up in healthcare type environments, but Imperial are, they're a college with 4 faculties in engineering, natural science, medicine and business. And they've decided to create a centralized research strategy that looks at not only the on-premise and the storage, but also the cloud-based offering that can support all of the various disciplines across their faculties and departments. So it's really representative of the type of company that Cloud Cubed are as well, and the types of customers that we expect or anticipate to do research in big pharma, in financial services, in healthcare, in engineering. So we're really aligned in terms of the partnership that we've forged with Imperial College London.
Partnership is the next subject that I want to touch on, because Matt Williams introduced it today, and it introduced CloudCube by building a long-term partnership. But I would be interested in hearing from you what you expect from that. Yeah,
so I think partnership has to be a two-way thing. So for me, I see massive value in the research software engineering community. I look at the role and I look at the archetypes within the roles or the various disciplines that are being created within it. And I see lots of synergies between the work that I'm doing in industry, trying to build a platform, trying to enable research workspaces, which are effectively software components that are pulled together and created for the purpose of doing research. So a partnership to me is that we can work in conjunction with RSE to leverage the skills the community have, but also I want to brand the engineers within Cloud Cubed as RSEs, and maybe look at how we can evolve and enhance our people to take on roles such as software developers, research software developers, or research software engineers. They could all be also be infrastructure specialists. They could be agile scrum masters. So these are all really interesting concepts that seem to be appearing within the RSE community also. So I'm very interested in that and making sure it's a two-way endeavour for us all.
In addition to Cloud Cubed, there were also a number of other sponsors, like UK AI Research Resource as gold sponsor, the Alan Turing Institute, Wellcome Trust and Microsoft as silver sponsors, and as bronze sponsors the EPCC, the SSI, Dreaming Spires, GitHub Education, UKRI, Newcastle and Edinburgh universities, not to mention individual and community sponsors. It's great to see the RSE community and this event in particular to continue to grow, and I hope to see you all next year, 2025, at the University of Warwick. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.